Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Thank you for being here today with me, in person or online. Today we continue our discussion of the Gospel of Mark. This is part 26 of a series. So, in the last few weeks, we discussed the fact that Jesus prophesied the end of the Second Temple and the end of Jerusalem. He predicted that there would be certain signs like famines and wars and rumors of wars that would be circulating in and around Jerusalem. And he said that when you saw these signs, which included natural disasters like earthquakes, etc., that was the time for his disciples to leave Jerusalem, to go outside of Jerusalem so that they wouldn't perish when the Roman military came in and burned everything down, destroyed everything, raped, murdered, pillaged. They leveled the Second Temple and a lot of Jerusalem. So Jesus gave a prophecy that there would not be one stone left unturned in the Second Temple, which his disciples were admiring whenever he visited Jerusalem to give his last pitch of his halakha, or his teachings, to try and soften the hard hearts of some of the people of his time, including the Pharisees, Sadducees, and their hearers in Jerusalem. And we discussed how that was the end of the world as they knew it. Literally, many people who were expecting the day of the Lord, which in some people's view, not all Jews believed it, but the day of the Lord was a day of great destruction. And for some, it could have meant the end of the world itself. It seems that that's how Paul interpreted it in his letters, right or wrong. So at the end of this dissertation about the fall of the Second Temple and the end of the world as they knew it, Jesus appends this information. Mark 13, 32 through 37. But about that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. People have twisted this to have a theological or Christological or eschatological viewpoint, but they really had to bend it. A lot of people, when they preach about these verses, will say that Jesus is predicting his second coming. You don't know when I'm going to come back and herald the end of the world and judge all souls. The good ones will go to heaven and the bad ones will go somewhere warm. So you better behave yourself, because I'm coming back. That's how most modern Orthodox Christians translate this. But it's much more simpler than this. It's so much more simple. So when you twist Jesus' words to squeeze out theological, doctrinal dogmas, then it's wrong. And it's not historical. Here Jesus is just continuing his discussion about the fact that the Second Temple will be destroyed and Jerusalem will be destroyed. So get the hell out of there before it happens. I'm telling you, there will be earthquakes. There will be famines. There will be wars and rumors of wars. Once you see these things happening, get out of Jerusalem. Head for the hills. Head for other areas and settlements outside of Jerusalem where you'll be safe. So Jesus gives these basic things to look for, warning signs that it's almost time for the Romans to come. And Jesus is simply just continuing this discussion. But nobody knows the exact day and hour that this will happen, when the Romans will come into Jerusalem, destroy Jerusalem, destroy the Second Temple, kill hundreds if not thousands of Jews. Who knows how many? There's different theories about how many Jews actually were alive at that time. But Jesus here is saying you just have to be vigilant. You have to keep awake. You have to be alert. You can't be sleepy or not look for the signs of this impending destruction of Jerusalem and murder of innocent Jews. Although we don't know the exact day and hour, the angels in heaven don't know when it will happen. The Son, the Bar Anash, the communion of saints, doesn't know when it's going to happen. Only God knows when this is going to happen. So beware, keep alert, be vigilant, because you don't know when that time will come. So pay attention. Because you don't know when the master of the house will come, when the Romans will enter Jerusalem. In the evening, at midnight, at cockcrow or dawn. You don't want to be caught asleep, not paying attention to the signs that Jesus gave, because he's going to suddenly come, and most likely if you're in Jerusalem, you're going to die. So Jesus says, what I say to you, my disciples, I say to all Jewish people, keep awake. I am prophesying this. He prophesied it about 27 to 30 years before it happened. So he's saying, I'm telling you now, pay attention. And this is very important for Jesus. A great spiritual master such as Jesus does not come to earth to labor to make a quantitative and qualitative change in the world. Quantitative by how many disciples he taught, qualitative by how his teachings changed his society, his world. He didn't come to do all that work just to have it all destroyed. So Jesus' disciples were repositories of the holy teachings, the halakha of Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus. He wanted to warn them to get out of Jerusalem before the destruction happened. Because if they were still in Jerusalem, there's a good chance that they would die. And with them would die the teachings of Jesus. And then, if they hadn't heeded his warning, we probably wouldn't even know that a Jesus existed. Or all of his world-changing, soul-changing teachings. We wouldn't have heard of them. So Jesus was warning them to preserve their lives and to preserve their teachings. This has nothing to do with the Pauline second coming of Christ. Paul tied that idea in with the Davidic Messiah. Jesus says in chapter 12 of Mark, there is no Davidic Messiah. I don't subscribe to that idea. I'm not teaching that idea to my disciples. Whether the Davidic Messiah is true or not, Jesus did not believe in it, and he did not teach it. But most preachers, ministers, and priests of all Orthodox Christian religions have an axe to grind to prove that, to make people dependent and fearful on their churches. when Jesus was just trying to save lives and preserve his halakha. That simple. Full stop. So the beginning of the end, now we're coming to the end of this traditional origin story of Jesus, because Mark was the first of the four Gospels, even though it's placed second after Matthew in the New Testament of most Bibles. Mark is proven to be the oldest one by biblical scholars and the testing of different codices, etc., carbon dating and when you got them from, when does the paper date back to, etc., the papyrus in this case. But anyhow, now we get to the beginning of the end of the story of Jesus. And the beginning of the end happened on a Thursday. Not all the scriptures get it correct, but Mark does seem to understand the Jewish tradition and timeline of Passover. And you'll see as we study the other Gospels that some of them got it wrong because they just didn't understand Judaism. They didn't understand Jewish customs because all of the four canonical Gospels were written by Gentiles, people that were not Jews. But the writer or writers of the Gospel of Mark did seem to understand, to some extent, the customs of Passover. So Mark 14, 1 through 2 says, "It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus and step by stealth and kill him. For they said, 'Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people.'" So this does hold true. Many Christians, less so today, but more in my generation and the generations before me, were taught that Jews were God killers. All Jews killed Jesus. And that's ridiculous, abhorrent, disgusting. All Jews did not kill Jesus. The chief priests and scribes were the Pharisees and the Sadducees that ran the second temple, the so-called second temple establishment, the authorities. And they handed Jesus over to the Roman governance. And the Romans mostly killed Jesus because they didn't want any uprising, any messianic uprising. They knew that a lot of Jews, especially in Jerusalem, had the Judean messianic expectation of a Davidic Messiah, which would be a king that would free Israel and restore Israel both materially and spiritually. So any warning of a Davidic Messiah could cause the Romans to come in and stamp out that spiritual uprising, that spiritual fervor, so there wouldn't be riots. Passover, of course, Pesach, is a very holy, high holiday or festival of Judaism, in which they celebrate when God went around killing people, and you smeared blood over your doors so that God would pass over your house and not destroy you. It was one of the elements of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt going back and establishing Israel, claiming a homeland for themselves. So this was an element of God setting his people free, or his Jews, the Jewish people, free. So that's the festival of Passover, which is all that we'll touch on for now. On Passover holidays, we always go into it in greater depth. But it was only 2 days before Passover. Passover happens on a Saturday, begins Friday evening and ends on Saturday evening. So 2 days before official Passover would be Thursday. And the chief priests, the temple establishment, were looking for a way to arrest and kill Jesus, because he had come into their land and were preaching against them. He was pointing out their flaws. He was teaching a doctrine of the heart rather than their doctrine of the law. He was teaching that spiritual liberation can happen by purifying the heart, not going into a temple and having some animal's throat sliced and thrown on a fire. I mean, what does that really do to purify your heart and stop you from sinning? Nothing. So he was teaching something quite revolutionary. He was renewing the covenant of God in a quite different way from the so-called traditionalists of the Second Temple, the priestly traditions of ancient Judaism. So they wanted to eliminate Jesus because he was a spiritual threat to them. But the chief priests are said here to have reasoned, not during the festival, because murdering somebody during Passover would be very impure, or there may be a riot among the people, because Jesus was kind of like a celebrity. He was a spiritual celebrity. Everywhere he went, people would draw in crowds to hear him speak. Whether they loved him or hated him, they'd come to hear him speak. And the chief priests of the temple establishment were very concerned that if they arrested him and killed him, especially on Passover, when many Jews, multitudes of Jews came to Jerusalem to offer their sacrifice in the temple itself, many of those people were interested in Jesus, loved Jesus, were followers of Jesus. And they were afraid that if they arrested him and killed him, that there would be a riot on the Passover, disrupting the holy festival. So, very interesting. So, again, the beginning of the end continued. Mark 14, 1 through 2, a very beautiful, poignant story from the Gospel of Mark. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard, and she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." Jesus took this as a sign of what he naturally would have known. This woman coming with ointment of nard, which is used to anoint dead corpses before they were buried. There were a lot of rituals of wrapping a Jewish person in fresh linen and anointing them in special ways and wrapping them in spices, etc., before they were interred in a tomb. For rich Jews, it would be inside a carved out stone tomb, and they would be sealed within. And then once the body decomposed, there would be bones left over, and those bones would later be taken out after the body had decomposed, And then usually your bones would be put into a family sepulcher of some kind, if the body wasn't already put in the human sepulcher for his body to decay or her body to decay with other family remains. So when this woman came to Jesus and anointed his head with nard and it would run down over his body, he saw it as a confirmation of God that he was going to die. And it didn't take a mystic or God in a human body to know that this was going to happen. He knew he was going up against power structures that would not be happy that he taught differently than they did. He knew that the chief priests and their followers were looking for him to arrest him and hurt him, punish him, or kill him. And in those days, threats as powerful as Jesus' teachings would have been killed. So Jesus knew that his time on earth was limited. He also knew when he went into Jerusalem, and when he entered the second temple and turned over tables, when he preached against the human-made teachings of the Pharisees, he knew that they were going to come after him hard. So this wasn't some mystical understanding that I'm going to die. It was a very practical understanding that they were coming for him. And Jesus saw that when Mary of Bethany anointed him with nard, he felt that that was like a funeral ceremony for his body, a preparation for his corpse. He saw himself as already dead. So he was beginning the idea of having detachment to his body, to his disciples. He was beginning after this point to cut earthly ties and to prepare his disciples for his death. You also see that Jesus was very charitable, that he gave money to the poor often. Otherwise, why would they criticize this woman for spilling very expensive ointment over his head? We could have given that money to the poor. And Jesus said, leave her alone. The poor, they'll always be with you, and you can always serve them with compassion and pure love and kindness, whenever you wish. But very soon I won't be here anymore. So let her anoint my body as a death ritual, preparing me for my ultimate burial. Her pure love and her being made an instrument of God, revealing the future to Jesus, should be remembered everywhere my halakha is taught. A lot of people confuse Mary of Bethany with Mary Magdala. It's just not the same person. There are many Marys, and it's easy to get them confused in the Bible. There is Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdala, Mary of Magdala, or Mary Magdalene, and there is Mary of Bethany. Mary of Bethany was also an exalted woman, disciple of Jesus. So she was very close to Jesus. And that's important to understand. She's often conflated with Mary Magdalene. It's not the truth. So Mary of Bethany was from Bethany. Mary of Magdala was from Magdala. So it's two Marys from two different cities. And then there was Mary of Nazareth, which was the mother of Jesus. And there were many other Marys. So just like there are many Johns, they're not all the same Johns. There's a lot of Mikes, or, a lot of people named the same name. This was not Mary Magdala. Mary of Bethany was also the sister of Martha. A lot of people will think that Mary Magdala or Mary Magdalene was the sister of Martha, and that's not true. Martha and Mary of Bethany, the same Mary of Bethany that anointed Jesus with nard, they were siblings. And that's where we get the famous Martha-Mary story from. Mary Magdalene was a whole different spiritual personage. She was the most exalted disciple of Jesus from many scriptural sources, both canonical and non-canonical. In the canonical gospel, she was the first to witness Jesus' resurrected body. That's a very special honor, showing her spiritual eminence, how she had understood Jesus' teachings, embodied his teachings, more than the male disciples, the male apostles. But it's important to understand that Mary of Bethany was different from Mary Magdalene. Then we come to the point of the betrayal. You see Judas Iscariot, on the right here, deciding how much gold it would take him to betray Jesus. So in Mark 14, 10 through 11, it says, "Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 apostles, went to the chief priests of the temple establishment in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him, to betray Jesus." Then we come to the Friday before Passover celebrations. Mark 14, 12 through 16. "On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, 'Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?' So he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, 'Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, "The teacher asks, 'Where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there.' So the disciples set out and went to the city and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal." So here Jesus was showing possibly mystical foreknowledge. That's how some people interpret this. However, this, just as it is in this rendition of this story, just seems relatively everyday and non-mystical. Jesus was a celebrity, and those that were traveling around him, even if they didn't know their names, they would know what they looked like. When you have spiritual masters, they often have people around them that you see traveling with them and supporting them, and they're easily recognizable. Even with my living master, there are many spiritual enunciates around her that travel with her, and their faces are very recognized. Some of them I know their names, and some of them I don't know. But I'd still recognize them in the street and smile and welcome them. So Jesus is just saying, go into the city of Jerusalem, and a man carrying a water jar will meet you. So he'll see them, come up to them, and then just follow this man to whatever house he goes to, and tell the owner of the house, "The teacher, Mar Yeshua, asks, where is the guest room where we can set up Passover for both Jesus and his disciples?" So some people interpret this again as being mystical, that they're going to see this man carrying a jar of water. But everybody had to gather water. So there would be many men, many women carrying a jar of water. It would be very hard from this description alone to recognize who this man would be, because they didn't have running water. Everybody carried a bucket or a jar and went to the well, and they drew up water and filled their water and went back home. So it's apparent that Jesus is saying that during this time of the day when you go into the city, there's going to be a man that carries a jar of water, and he's going to recognize you, and you'll say hello to each other and then follow him back to his home. That house is where we will celebrate the Passover meal. Mark 14:17 through 21 is very interesting. When it was evening on Friday, he came with the 12. And when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed and to say to him one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." So here we see possible history mixing with theological redaction in the Gospel of Mark. Yeah? So when it came evening, they all went to the Passover meal, and Jesus announced that one of you that's eating with me is going to betray me. And they all said, "Surely not me. I'm not going to betray you." And of course, if in fact Judas did betray Jesus, he's going to say the same thing. Otherwise, all the loyal disciples are going to attack him, arrest him, so to speak, try to prevent him from turning over Jesus and betraying him. So of course, Judas said, "Not me, not me," like everybody else. And then Jesus said, "One of you is going to do it." So this was mystical foreknowledge. This was definitely a premonition of sorts that Jesus was experiencing. And all great spiritual masters have psychic powers and various spiritual gifts for fulfilling their mission. When you are one with God, you share in God's omniscience, in God's power, his malkuth, the sovereignty of God. So Jesus surely had such psychic spiritual gifts, and this was something that was foreknowledge. So he understood from his divine spiritual connection with God, sharing in God's omniscience, he was able to foretell that one of his disciples was going to betray him. It's not clear if he knew which one, at least in this point in the story and in this gospel, but he knew that one would. The next line is not historical. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. So here, most modern Orthodox Christians interpret this line that Jesus was the suffering servant predicted by the prophet Isaiah, which is incorrect. Very, very incorrect. So Jesus pretty much knew he would be arrested and killed. It doesn't take somebody that's psychic to figure that out. But he did mystically understand that one of his disciples would betray him. And he said it would have been better for that one not to have been born, because the negative hope, the sinfulness, the impurity, the bad karma, that person who betrays their spiritual master attains within his soul or her soul is very damaging and limiting. For many future lives, that soul will have to suffer to make up for such a betrayal. Because God gives to each sincere spiritual seeker a spiritual master. And that spiritual master is a channel of God's grace to uplift him or her to spiritual rebirth, to attain the Malkuth, to become part of the Baranash. And to betray that trust is to betray God, because the spiritual master represents God on earth. But that here Jesus seems to say that, I, Jesus, the Son of Man, in the scriptures, this was written about me, that I'd have to suffer. And that is not historically accurate. All prophets prophesied for the people of their time. Isaiah did not prophesy about Jesus. Never, not once. And during the sacrament of Shabbat, concurrent to this time, as I teach about the Gospel of Mark, we're also learning about the book of Isaiah on Fridays, on the Sabbath. And I'm teaching you in those courses, in those classes, what those prophecies that Christians say were about Jesus were really about. So Jesus was not the expected suffering servant of Isaiah. He just wasn't. So nowhere in the scriptures, in the Hebrew Bible, was Jesus predicted to come. Nowhere. Not one of them. They were just nice cherry-picked phrases that sounded like they fit the Jesus narrative that was produced after his crucifixion. And they picked things to support that because Christianity was a new religion. It was a persecuted religion for a while before it became the Roman Empire's state religion. So in order to lend more authority, more believability to the new Christian religion, they took parts of the ancient Judaic religion to support that it expected Jesus to be the culmination of its teachings. It spiritually appropriated Judaism in a very improper way to the current day. And all non-biased biblical scholars protest this religious appropriation of Judaism into Christianity. Jesus was a Jew, and he would have been disgusted about the cherry-picked proof texts throughout the Christian Testament. So, is it historical? Son of Man must suffer? No, not in the way it's taught, but maybe. Maybe. So, Daniel in the Old Testament doesn't mention that the Son of Man will be betrayed, tortured, and killed. That fate is explained by the suffering servant imagery of Isaiah 53, Isaiah chapter 53. Jesus has spent his time with the disciples explaining that the two figures are one personified person. That this Son of Man, which they also conflate to be the Davidic Messiah, but of course we know that the Baranash, the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, is the communion of saints. That is the anointed new humanity that Jesus taught, or the second Adam. Jesus evidently in chapter 12 of Mark decried and opposed the concept of Davidic Messiah. But Christians, ever since the time of Paul, merged the Baranash of Daniel and Enoch into the Judean messianic expectation of the Davidic Messiah. They merged those two. And then in addition to that, they merged the suffering servant of Isaiah into this mishmash hodgepodge of Messiah that they tried to make Jesus out to be. And Jesus only taught the Son of Man collective Messiah, which he developed and understood from the scriptures of Daniel and Enoch and parts of Isaiah, but not the suffering servant part of Isaiah. So Jesus was not the suffering servant, even though he surely did suffer for his teachings and for God. So here, this last line, cited from this link that's on the screen. Jesus has spent his time with the disciples explaining that the two figures are one unified person. But actually, according to Christian doctrine and dogma and myth and untruth, he was actually mixing three figures. Of course, it's not historical, but the idea that modern Christians do is they mishmash Son of Man. They think it's the same as the Davidic Messiah. It's not. And then they mix it with the suffering servant of Isaiah to describe why Jesus had to die, why he wasn't outwardly victorious. And we'll discuss more of this in the weeks to come. The next excerpt is from my thesis about Pauline letters, the epistles of Paul. I wrote, the concept of the suffering servant was not about Jesus. It was cherry-picked by early Christians and interpreted to justify Jesus' suffering and death on the cross. However, the prophets of the Hebrew Testaments made prophecies for the people of their time to benefit from, not for some far-off future time. This was the same for the prophet Jesus, who predicted the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and warned his disciples to leave before the impending death and destruction that was to occur. Bart D. Ehrman points out in the Bible, a historical and literary introduction, pages 170 through 171, that most readers fail to note the verb tense of the suffering servant passages. They do not indicate that someone will come along at a later time and suffer in the future. They are talking about past suffering. The servant had already suffered, although he will be vindicated. And so this is not about a future suffering Messiah. The book of 2nd Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah itself, indicates who the servant of the Lord is. It is Israel, God's people. So definitively, the suffering servant idea or concept developed by the prophet Isaiah or the school of Isaiah after his death, it was not about Jesus. It was about the people of Israel. Suffering in the past and then being restored in the future. However, Jesus does say in Mark 13:8, this is but the beginning of the birth pangs of Messiah. So Jesus did insinuate that suffering is part of purification. When we're purifying our hearts, there is pain in the mind, pain in the emotions, pain from needing to abandon unbeneficial thoughts, words, and deeds, habits, and desires. So there's always the growing pains of moving from the first Adam to becoming part of the second Adam, the Bar Anash, the Son of Mankind collected Messiah. In order to become a saint, we must lose what we were before. And that can be a painful process. Most people will not need to go through the extreme pain, thank God, of what the Jewish people went through at the hands of the Romans when they destroyed the Second Temple. That was a time in history that Jesus saw as the sign of the beginning of the birth pangs of the Baranash, the communion of saints. Because when people are put under pressure, whether it's the pressure of war, political pressure, spiritual pressure, or just everyday pressures of life and growing up and maturing spiritually, friction is what gets rid of our rough edges, what smooths us out, what purifies us. So no matter who we are, if we want to grow spiritually, there'll be some level of suffering in that. But Jesus was not the suffering servant of Isaiah. He wasn't. But he does seem to indicate that in order to be rebirthed into the collective Messiah, the Baranash, the Son of Mankind collective Messiah, he does insinuate that there will be growing pains for everyone. It may not be as explicit, as violent as what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD, but everyone must face their inner demons. Everyone must look at themselves and make painful changes in the level of mind, emotion, sometimes physicality, and a lot of the time spiritual. We can't escape that. Purification involves friction, involves being put into the fire on many levels of being. Let's continue with the Liturgy of the Chalice.